Okie dokie. And yes, any new Remnant viewers, I do look just as miserable as I sound. But I'm going to go ahead and start filling in a loadout on the sheet. But if you guys watched the latest co-op God mode video, or if you have been watching my community posts, you guys have already been aware that a new and improved sheet was coming, except it's a bit more than a DR calculator this time. I would say it's more of a loadout calculator as a whole. But admittedly, and just to set expectations, this is only meant to calculate anything that has to do with tanking or survivability. So not just DR, but everything else that goes into the tanking process as well. But the sheet is structured in a way that will allow us to branch into damage calculations if we choose to later. Now, some of you are probably going to end up wondering why the overkill when we already had a functional DR calculator, and for our purposes that's really all we needed. And the answer is the old sheet had a critical flaw in that it not only required the user to understand how to use the sheet, but also how to interpret in-game values to enter into the sheet in order to use the calculator correctly. And so that resulted in, say, on the total armor cell, there was one guy, and he's probably going to watch this video, don't hate me. He thought that the total armor cell was where he inputs his armor DR. And so because he had 40-ish armor DR, he put 40 into the total armor cell. And then he looked at the resulting total damage reduction and said, you know, that doesn't look quite right. And I had to look at it and just be like, yeah, that's not. And so the task became basically to make a calculator that you'd still have to understand how to use. But the key difference here is that I've already backloaded everything from the game. All the information, all the stats, all that shit. So that way you guys don't have to know shit about what you're inputting into the sheet other than what you're using. And then I've already calculated all the rest. There are still slots for weapons, but they really don't matter so much. It's really just there for consistency. So if you're trying to fill out a build and maybe you want to send a screenshot to someone, then you can send exactly what you're using there. The mods matter solely for Song of Aether. If you guys have watched some of my videos, you already know why I like that and why that has a part to play in tanking. The mutators do not matter unless it is on a melee weapon, because steadfast is a thing. But beyond that, everything that matters is going to be up in this upper section here, including your traits. The first two traits will automatically fill by default based on the classes you've selected, but the other traits do have to be filled in manually. But I will point out that the level matters. It's not going to be assumed all level 10s. So if someone, I know some people had questions about this, what if they don't spec full 10 into Blood Bond, which is a really fucking weird choice, but if you don't, this can account for that. But now that I've filled out a loadout, let's cover the sheet and what it covers, how it factors things in or excludes things. Because some of you are going to note that the damage reduction seems really high at 93.21%, which is obviously over the 81% cap. And looking at the loadout, a lot of you are going to recognize it from the solo tank video, which you know only hit the damage reduction cap we didn't go over. And if we go down and look at the EHP, a lot of you are going to wonder why it seems really high compared to what it should be. And that's because even though you can input everything into the calculator still calculates everything from everything you input. So you have to tell it what to exclude as well, and we'll get to that in a minute. Off to the left here, we just have our basic stats: health, stamina, armor, weight. The weight color will change in accordance to what weight category you're in, and it will also increase the stamina cost. You have your flat health regeneration, which is a separate stat from your percent health regen, and then you have your stamina regen per second, as well as your stamina cost and gray health regen. I also included a brief description on gray health for people who are very confused, because that is typically a comment on every single one of my videos. Down below, we just have an armor breakdown. This is not your total armor. It is your base armor value along with your armor effectiveness. Armor effectiveness is gained from shit like Fortify or the armor effectiveness fragment, which if we put in here just for shits and giggles, you will see that the value changes to 65%. The fragments do assume that you are using mythics. Below that though, we have a breakdown on damage reduction. First, we state any bulwark stacks that we have. I included a brief explanation on how bulwark stacks even function. And then we have the flat damage reduction without bulwark. Then we have our flat damage reduction with bulwark. And then we have our armor DR, which all calculates into our maximum total damage reduction, which again cannot actually go over 80%. If you are over 80%, that's just a massive fucking waste. But why is it 93.21? That's because it's including damage reduction from sources like Steadfast, which is the melee mutator that gives you 20% flat DR while you're in the middle of a charged attack. So we can go over here and we can choose our melee mutator and choose to disable that, and you're going to notice our damage reduction is going to take a plummet. And on top of that, it's also factoring in damage reduction from sources like Magnetic Field, which is the engineer passive that gives you 15% flat DR whenever you're near a turret or carrying one. So you can go over and disable passive number 6, and you can tell which one it is because it says over here, Magnetic Field. You can turn that off, and then our DR goes to the 80% that we mention in that specific build video, because we can't reliably count on the turret being up to actually hit the DR cap. And that build isn't a melee build anyways, so we just have World's Edge on there for shits and giggles. So just keep in mind that while the sheet does calculate everything, it calculates everything. So you still need to be aware of what sources should be disabled, or if for troubleshooting purposes you want to figure out what source is providing what value, you can go through and one by one just disable things until you see the values change. Moving on though, we have relic effectiveness, healing effectiveness, relic use time, and then lifesteal. This isn't particularly useful to us now, I just included it so we could use it later. Going even farther below, we have consumables and quick use consumables. So quick use consumables would be something like, I don't know, confidence booster, which by the way is yet again another damage reduction source because you saw our DR change. So we could go over here and disable confidence booster because we don't want to factor that in. There are 4 total concoction slots, but the other 3 aren't going to open up unless you choose Alchemist as one of your classes, at which point you can go through and select concoctions here. Note that even if you don't have Alchemist selected, if you do have a concoction here, it still won't calculate, because the calculations for these 3 get disabled regardless of if the check is checked, if Alchemist isn't in play. Moving over though, we do have our archetype selection. Go figure. The abilities that populate in this drop-down menu are of course dependent on the class that you're selecting. So if you choose Challenger, then you're going to have the Challenger options to choose from. But if you choose Medic, it's obviously going to be Medic. Then we have our armor selection. Once again, you don't need to know your armor values. You just need to say what armor you're using. I already factor in the weight, the armor, all of it. And then we have our selection for accessories, amulets, rings, all the above. You're going to note that the entire item list is in here. So all the amulets will be in the amulet dropdown, all the rings will be in the ring dropdowns. Not all of these actually matter for calculations yet. But again, I only included these just for consistency's sake, so that way if you're making a loadout and sending it to someone, you don't have to have like this blank slot that you say, oh, and by the way, the blank slot is X, Y, or Z. You can just fill in the ring, it'll include its description, and you can send it and share it away. Moving forward though, we have the relic, and as before, the only relic we really need to tiptoe around in terms of our calculations is Resonating Heart. But other benefits, like say the 25% damage reduction from Crystal Heart is included in the Crystal Heart selection, and it does get calculated in elsewhere. If you'd want to disable that, if you want to exclude the damage reduction provided by Crystal Heart, you can go over here and disable the relic, and you'll see our DR drop and the relic get disabled. But otherwise, your relic statistics, as well as the healing provided, are going to be listed down below. This complex effect area is not going to populate unless you have Resonating selected. Resonating changes the way the relic works, and if you guys have watched my prior videos, you already know why. I'm not going to dig too deep into why here. So just know that for the purposes of simulating healing, because we have to guess when it comes to Resonating Heart just how much health or overhealing within the 5-second window, you actually need to enter in a value here to tell it how much to guess. Otherwise, it's going to look like Resonating is beyond worthless on this sheet. But we don't care too much about Resonating overall anyways. Moving on down, we're going to skip traits because we don't care. Obviously over here we just have our troubleshooting and calculation toggle. Just to reiterate though, you can literally disable anything. You can disable an armor piece, you can disable a relic fragment, you can disable the ability to stop it from calculating, like the medic shield is going to provide shields. If you don't want to have that calculate, you can disable that, which is going to get into part of our next area down here, advanced stats. So this value here, you guys probably were thinking that the EHP looked a little too high, and it was, but that's because it's including shield. So over here we have our EHP, and if you've watched our prior videos, you understand what effective health is meant to be, how it's calculated, all that jazz. Our effective health per second in terms of healing, and then our effective DR. We obviously can't go above 80% damage reduction with normal means, so we have to use shit like Song of Aether or Blood Bond. And Blood Bond and all that jazz gets calculated down here. Reduced enemy damage would be something like Aether here, or the Challenger. Passive for when you use an ability within X distance of an enemy. Damage kept is something like Blood Bond, or say, like in the latest video, Game Master's Pride, where after we input something like that, we can clarify that we're playing with people, as well as how many people, and that changes the damage kept to 70%, because you have your damage reduction from splitting damage 3 ways, as well as the damage reduction from sharing 10% of the remainder to your minions. And now the EHP, because of shields, looks even crazier. But if you want to understand just how crazy co-op can get with Game Master's Pride, I have an entire other video for that. Please go watch it. Circling back to advanced stats. The co-op consideration is only going to matter if you actually have Game Master's Pride equipped. Otherwise, this entire section doesn't do anything. But beyond the damage mitigation factors, we have passives and abilities in terms of healing. So this is our flat only health per second. And then separate from that healing is our percent only health per second. So right now, this is at the 5.1% because it's getting the 30% HP healed over the duration of the medic shield, and it's multiplying that by our healing effectiveness. So if we want to exclude our percent healing, then we can go ahead and disable our ability number 1, and that will go down to 0. So now it's only factoring our passive health regen from stuff like regrowth, and then converting that to an equivalent percent. And then if you want to, you can also include the relic healing, and it gives a similar breakdown, and you can include that relic healing into the total EHP per second up above. And then separate from EHP, because EHP is different than HP, it will give you your healing in HP per second or percent HP per second. And below that, it'll just let you know if you have any global healing penalties in effect, because shit like Game Master's Pride reduces your healing by 50%. And then lastly, we have shields. So if we didn't have that medic ability disabled, we have 100% shield that is coming in. Bonus is literally just your shield effectiveness, which is a fragment, by the way. So we'll get rid of healing effectiveness, we'll choose shield, if I can fucking spell. Shield effectiveness, and that is a 20% bonus to shields, as long as you have the mythic fragment. This will tell you your total shield percentage, it will tell you your total shield EHP, because a lot of people were wondering how shield gets factored in. It does get damage reduction. So having shield is literally just having free health. So that's why right now our EHP is much higher than it should be on a solo build. And that's just because the shield is in there. But I also want to clarify that including shield into your EHP does not change any of the other calculations like EHP per second. So you don't have to worry about including the shield and it fucking up any other calculation. They are completely separate. But in general, obviously 120% shield is going to do a little more than double your EHP. And then I think that's it. Obviously, with something as comprehensive as this, there's probably going to be a few things wrong, and I fully expect there to be. So if you guys do encounter anything wrong, if you're seeing this on Reddit, reply to my post. If you're seeing this in the Remnant community Discord, ping me. If you're in my Discord, just let me know. This is a rather large clusterfuck of a sheet, and it is slightly ambitious in what it is meant to take care of for people who have no clue what the hell they're doing. But the huge positive, in addition to handling everything for less experienced people, is that it allows us to calculate far more than we ever were before with the old calculator. But I am extremely fucking tired, so if any of this was jumbled in any capacity, I am so sorry. But I think that's it, and I will catch you guys later.